It's funny. Don't you love how people just tend to show up at the perfect time in your life, depending on where you are and what you're doing? And I made a post about this recently, kind of the evolution of the importance of different skills at different levels of entrepreneurship. When you're getting started, marketing and sales are really important, arguably the most. As you grow, management, recruiting becomes more and more important because then you're building a team around you and trying to get the most out of them. And then after that, I think it really becomes leadership. So I'm at a point in my career right now where I've been studying management and leadership, been taking Udemy courses every week, trying to grow myself in that category as a leader. And lo and behold, an expert appears before us, Joe Hart, who is the current and acting CEO of Dale Carnegie Training, one of the oldest and largest training companies in the world. They're over 80 countries. Dale Carnegie, obviously the very famous author and entrepreneur that a lot of people are familiar with today. And Joe and I talked about me getting into a leadership class in Tampa. And he also has a podcast, which is the top 50 ranking leadership podcast, the Dale Carnegie podcast. So we're going to be discussing today a lot of leadership skills. So if you're listening to this and you're at a point in your entrepreneurial career where you think it's time to develop yourself as a leader, and I argue that it's right now, depending on where you are in your career. So without further ado, I want to introduce Joe. Joe, welcome. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me and having this discussion. I'm excited to learn. I know the audience is as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'm excited to be with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Same here. Very much same here. And leadership's an interesting topic, right? I didn't even know where to start to become a better leader. When I was trying to become a better marketer or salesman, I watched videos, I went to courses, I kind of knew what I had to learn. Leadership's not like that at all. So give me the 101. What is leadership? Why is it important?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of different opinions about what leadership is. I'll speak to it from my standpoint. What I'd say is leadership is about bringing out the best in other people so you can accomplish great things together. And just by way of contrast, when I started my career, I was a lawyer, a young lawyer, and it's a very much a solo kind of an undertaking. I then ultimately went into business where I was working with people and teams, and my concept of leadership at that time, not having really been a manager or whatnot, was that you kind of you tell people what to do, or you have a plan. You come in, the leader is a strong person who comes in with a plan and they're going to take charge and so forth. And what I've realized over time, and especially as I've grown and matured, is that the best leaders are those, number one, they're humble. They know they don't have all the answers. They're not going to come in riding on a horse and saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take charge. It's like you've got to develop relationship with people. You've got to build trust with people. And you've got to listen and try to find people who've got good ideas. You've got to unlock kind of the greatness that other people have and work together as one team toward that vision that the leader has. So it's one thing as a leader to have a vision. I mean, you've got this great firm that you've started and you've built, and it's going in a great direction. You got all these other people. How do I get them on board? How do I help them develop, because they've got their goals, their objectives, and how do you make sure that those goals and objectives are aligned with yours so that you can go in the same direction and just really accomplish things maybe that you otherwise never would have been possible.
So then the question becomes, right? Can you become a good leader if you weren't born a good leader? Because a lot of these skills that you're talking about, inspiring people, leading them, a lot of these things almost feel innate and part of your personality. So how much of leadership do you think is trained versus comes naturally?
In my experience, a very, very high percentage of it is trained. And I say that because I've seen so many people who would say, gosh, I was an introvert by background, or I really wasn't comfortable dealing with people, or I didn't know how to lead people. And then they took programs or courses, like, you're going to Udemy to take courses, you're learning, you're practicing and trying. And certainly in Dale Carnegie, we've been doing this for 110 years, and we've seen people transform over time into someone who really can not only manage themselves more effectively, but they can manage and lead teams. So it's 100%. I don't think there's much that can't be learned and developed if people are willing to put in the time and the effort, like you are right now. You're saying, hey, look, I know I want to grow, I want to get stronger and get better. If you've got that heart and that mindset, I don't think there's anything you can't accomplish.
Great. And I'd love to spend some time a little bit later on talking about some of the strategies that you can use to become a better leader, how to hone those skills, where to look for information and training, because I've found that challenging. But first, let's talk a little bit about the difference between manager and leader, because I've found there's a lot of overlap, but I'd love to kind of hear your expert definition and differentiation.
Yeah, and again, it's not dissimilar to leader. I think there's different points of view. Mine is that and again, sometimes people look at manager versus leader like one is good and one is bad. I think that
Right.
there are roles for both. The manager is going to be more focused on accomplishing objectives and tasks and so forth, coordinating with people. The leader is someone, and by the way, a leader and a manager, you could be a leader and a manager. In fact, I would argue you should be a leader and a manager at the same
Right.
time, which means that the leadership qualities aren't reserved simply for the person with the highest title. Um, in many ways, every single one of us can and should be leaders. Leadership is about taking initiative. It's about vision. It's about working with other people and creating a culture where other people can be their best. So the manager has those jobs. I think what happens though, Jay, is that, many times, people kind of think about the manager as someone who's just really kind of like this, just purely tactical. And the leader is the CEO or the executive VP or the COO. Yeah, if you've got those titles, you really have to be strategic and above the fray to some degree. And those same qualities that a CEO has are many of them really everybody should have. And just let me give you one example. We talk about culture. So the CEO may be responsible for driving the culture. But if you think about like a team engagement, and we talk a lot about psychological safety. Do people feel comfortable speaking up? Are they afraid that if they say something that it's going to be counted against them, that people are going to make fun of them, et cetera? So people are quiet and they stay quiet. You can have a team, where individuals are supportive or encouraging or positive, or the opposite, where they're negative and toxic and destructive. So it doesn't matter that someone might not have any direct reports. Someone who says, "Jay, that's a stupid idea. That would never work," and they're allowed to create that kind of an environment. That person, is creating a culture. That person is a leader, but not a good one. So I think that what I would say that really everyone, at whatever stage of career they're at, is, think about the kind of values and the things that you would want to share in that organization. Be that leader at any stage. You don't need to wait for the title. It's like, lead, take action, build other people up, demonstrate respect. And if you do those things, you're going to continue to grow in your career.
Speaking of growing in your career, obviously you didn't start Dale Carnegie Institution. When was it started? Probably hundreds of years ago, over 100 years ago.
110, 1912 is when Dale Carnegie started our company.
Cool. So either you're in your hundreds, or you became the CEO, likely through building your own leadership skills and building yourself into somebody who could lead an organization like this. So, what was that trajectory path like as an entrepreneur?
Jay,
Talk to me. Go ahead.
yeah, it was very unconventional. I started out with one objective in high school and college, and that was to be a lawyer, join a big firm, make a lot of money. That was my goal when I was younger, and I was on that pathway. I joined a large firm in the Detroit area. It was a top 10 firm, and was doing very well, and was on a partner track. And I took a Dale Carnegie course. Again, I was only 27 when I took it, and I took it not dissimilar to you. You're taking these courses because you're trying to learn and grow, and I wanted to learn and grow. So I took a Dale Carnegie course, and it challenged me on my vision. It got me thinking about, okay, if it's 10 or 20 or 40 years from now, do I want to look back at my life and what do I want to see? So I left the practice of law. I went into a large publicly traded company for a couple of years, and then I started my own e-learning company. And this is in 2000 when e-learning was really not big. It was kind of more emergent at that time. And my first client became Dale Carnegie. I worked with Dale Carnegie and developed e-learning for them in multiple languages. And I did that because this is a program that had a huge impact on me in my life. I loved it, and I wanted to get that out to more people. So I built that first business and sold it in 2005, and then started another company with some partners who basically, they're the ones that bought my company. And I came in to be the president of that business for about 10 years, which I know you've got a lot of experience in health and wellness. And that company was a health promotion company called Asset Health based in Troy, Michigan.
Very cool. So
Then
went
I
into
got,
business.
yeah. And then, when the CEO of Dale Carnegie retired in, I guess, 2014, I was invited to enter into that recruitment process. And I joined Dale Carnegie as the CEO in 2015.
And was this the first big organization that you had led up until this point?
This was the biggest by far. I mean, this was I led other organizations, but this was an international organization versus a US based organization. And yeah, but I found that a lot of the qualities that had helped me be successful in the past enabled me to be successful here. One of which was, coming in and really listening and trying to learn from other people. And, again, I think there can be a tendency to come in and try to solve problems. And that's important. The way we go about solving those problems is probably more important. If we can engage people in that process, if we can respect people, listen to people, develop a plan. We say in Dale Carnegie that people support a world they help create, right? So people support a world they help create. And if you can engage people and work together and frankly learn from people, our plan was far better as a result of all the other people who had input in it versus where I started. So part of leadership for me has been learning really that my ideas might be good and they're always better after engaging other people and listening to them.
That's really good feedback. And I know you've had a lot of experience in training as a leader. You've probably trained hundreds, maybe thousands. Do you have a number? What is a rough estimate? How many have you trained?
So we have about 10 million people who've taken Dale Carnegie programs. We've got tens of millions of people who've bought and read How to Win Friends and Influence People. So, I mean, it's immeasurable the impact that this organization has had on people
Yes.
and companies and organizations and communities. We've got just tons of stories about how that's happened.
Yeah, and if people listening haven't read that book, that's literally on the top 3 books you should read as an entrepreneur. And it's honestly a book on leadership, right? It's how to get the most out of people and in little tweaks that you can make in your day-to-day life and communication. So with that being said, tens of millions. You've probably encountered and studied several different leadership styles. Which what are the different leadership styles and do you have a preference? Which one is best?
So it's hard for me to answer that. I know that, academically, we could talk about different leadership styles that are taught in, say, business school.
Right.
And I guess what I focus on is less from an academic standpoint. What have I seen in terms of how people engage? And the two predominant ones, and I might use these as polar examples just to make a point. One is one that's a people first kind of approach, which is more of a Dale Carnegie approach. And I'll give you an example of a leader who I think embodies that. And another might be one that has, substantial disregard. It's more about the objective. So in the latter case, someone, Steve Jobs clearly was fantastic and brilliant in terms of the things that he achieved. I never met him. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. Notwithstanding the fact that I understand that he was very difficult to work with and demeaning to some people, at least that's what has been reported.
Right.
Another leader who I know and I consider a mentor personally is Alan Mulally. Alan was the CEO of Boeing and Ford. He saved really both companies at perilous times, but Ford, he came into Ford and it was just, Jay, it was a toxic culture. I mean, people are undermining and so forth. It was a company on its way to bankruptcy. And his focus was on the people. And he's a Dale Carnegie. I mean, he'll talk about how to Win Friends influenced his leadership style. His leadership style was about transparency and trust and getting people to work together. And so, I mean, he was able to turn around that company, save it from bankruptcy. It was the only auto company that did not declare bankruptcy, U.S. auto company. GM and Chrysler both did and took federal government help. But his leadership really made that possible. So, I was in India at one point and I was giving a talk on leadership and someone raised their hand and they said, hey, why does someone need to be like a Dale Carnegie kind of leader, a people first leader, an Alan Mulally kind of a leader? Steve Jobs was an amazing leader. And my answer is yes, he was an amazing leader. Number one, he was brilliant. So maybe when you're brilliant, you can get away with some things
Right.
that other people can't. But we have one life here, right? And if we can accomplish phenomenal objectives and do it by bringing out the best in other people, why wouldn't we do that? They're not mutually exclusive. You can focus on people and bring out the best in people and listen and respect and still achieve great results. And you have to, as leaders, we have to deliver results. That's a primary responsibility of leadership. So that's what I would say relative to that question.
Yeah, I've got some CEOs running through my head right now as you bring up some of these names. And the trend that I keep thinking is people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they're the leaders, they're the CEOs, but they also founded the company. So that makes me think they're also kind of the visionaries, they're the ones who are probably trying to push really hard and push their ideas really fast, as opposed to some of those great CEOs, like the one you just mentioned who took over Ford, were hired leaders, hired CEOs. So I'd love for you to kind of give me your interpretation of the difference. Do you usually see a stark difference in those two types of leaders?
That's a really insightful question. I have to think about that. Going back to the point, I don't know that it's mutually exclusive. In other words, a
Yeah.
founder who is driven and really pushing hard objectives can also be someone who's doing that while building up their people. And I'm trying to think of some specific examples. I know that there are many that are there. And it's true though. Maybe someone like Alan Mulally had gone through a process of learning to grow as a leader,
Mhm.
and had coaching and that type of thing. So maybe that was a part of it. But I'd also say there are plenty of people who grow up in kind of corporate America who are not that kind of a leader.
Right.
So maybe that's something that gives people a potential access to a kind of training, so to speak, that maybe other people might not have necessarily had.
Right.
But yeah, I think again going back to your question about I mean, in you and your training. I mean, we can all learn. This is not necessarily something that's innate. Anyone can become, but it's you got to want it. You got to be intentional about it.
Right. No, I completely agree. And every entrepreneur, even if your team is five, should start to think about these things because eventually you're going to need a team. Now, my next question was uh, leadership styles we discussed. What are some ways that you can become a better leader? Say you're not. Oh, here was my other question. Sorry about that. Do you think it's ever time, or there's ever a time and place where your company can outgrow you as a leader and you need to bring on a new CEO? And when is that?
Yeah, that certainly has happened for many people. You look at skill sets, and someone who's maybe a founder of an organization, they may be technically strong. They've got a great idea. They're able to take it to a certain point. There are different skills. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a great book, which is "What Got You Here Won't Get You There."
Yeah.
And which means that you are the skills that may get us to a certain point in our career may or may not be suited to what is necessary to get the organization and people to the next level. My personal point of view is that people can learn how to do those things, but they have to really want to, and some of it may be foreign. It may not be comfortable for some people, and they may be better suited to bring somebody else in to do some of that leadership.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Now, say you don't want to bring on a CEO and you want to hone in your own skills as a leader, become a better leader, as we all should every day. What are some steps that entrepreneurs can take to becoming a better leader?
Yeah. So, you're doing it. And I think this is what my experience was to you. Again, I'm a little bit older, uh, probably, I don't know, at least 20
Just
years,
I just
probably.
turned 31.
Okay. So I'm 54. So my guess of at least 20 was about right. When I was early in my career, I knew that there was a lot I didn't know. And my dad, growing up, always talked about the importance of personal growth. He said, life's about growth and getting better and better, and you need to invest in yourself. So for me, I was investing in myself through, at that time, through reading and through taking programs. So, which is pretty much what was available, if you go back, 30 years or so. So I would be looking for books. I would devour books. I would take, I mean, the Dale Carnegie course. Again, that was transformative in my life. That was exactly what I needed at that time. And How to Win Friends and Influence People, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. These two books written by Dale Carnegie. So my advice is look for learning as much as you can. The other thing, though, Jay, is find mentors. I mean, your podcast is Mentors Collective, and I've always had mentors at every stage of my career. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. If we can learn from someone who's already done what we want to do, we can cut our process of getting where we want to be. So seek out training, seek out books, seek out mentors. And I'd be remiss, of course, if I didn't really. I mean, you and I were talking about Dale Carnegie a little bit. We're a global organization that specializes in this. We have helped develop some of the world's greatest leaders and some of the top leaders. We work with 400 of the Fortune 500 companies. We work with small companies, medium companies. So DaleCarnegie.com could be a good place to start.
Absolutely. And in my studies over the past couple of months, trying to become a better leader, one theme kept coming up over and over again. And that is, to be a leader, you need to be somebody that people want to follow. So a big part of leadership is personal growth, becoming the best version of yourself so that people will look up to and respect you in a way that they will essentially follow. So I've really stressed personal development, my entire professional life. But do you think that that plays a role in becoming a good leader?
100%. I mean, in fact, I think it's hard to be a good leader if you aren't doing some of those things first. And you and I were talking before the podcast just a little bit about the book that I've written, which co-written. It's called Take Command. It's by myself and Michael Crom, who's Dale Carnegie's grandson. It's about finding your inner strength, building enduring relationships, and living the life you want. And that book is really this whole first part is centered on the question you asked, Jay, which is, you got to first start with yourself. This is take command of your thoughts and your emotions. I mean, so much of who we are and how we perform is just wrapped up in terms of, are we courageous or are we fearful? Are we insecure? Are we worried? Do we have imposter syndrome? Are we bold? What holds us back? And all you can have two people in the exact same situation. One person sees opportunity, one person sees crisis. What's the difference? It's the way people see things. So for each person who wants to be a leader, who wants to be a successful entrepreneur or a leader in an organization, to start with themselves and their mindsets and to say, how am I thinking? What kind of thoughts do I have? Am I looking for opportunity or am I looking for excuses? Am I looking for, am I a victim? So that's the first thing, is taking control of your thoughts, your emotions, being strong, resilient, and courageous. If you can imagine, you're trying to start you've started a successful business. You want to take it to a new level. You take you and say you're courageous and resilient, and something happens and your business takes a hit, but you're going to find a way, versus someone who just doesn't have that. So that goes to the second part, which is, like you said this, at some point you need to build a team. So how do you build relationships? What are the relationships like in your life? The people you work with, your family, your friends. I look at my career, and it could not have been possible without just an incredible wife and family support. Those relationships have been absolutely critical. Networking and people who helped me along the way, mentors, have been an important part of my career growth. So having relationships and knowing how to nurture those relationships is vital. And then the third part of the book is about taking command of your future. What's your vision? I mean, you've got a vision, for Otter PR. You got a vision for your podcast. You get a vision for all kinds of things, and that's awesome. Part of what we ask in the book is, hey, do people have a vision for themselves? What are your values? What's the legacy you want to leave? And how can we walk you through developing all those things so you can take command? So take command is really about, taking command of your life, living the life that you want, and getting to the point where, if it's 10 or 20 or 30 years from now and you're looking back on your life, you can say, man, I really did the things I wanted to do.
Beautiful. I definitely recommend everyone listening to go read that book when it comes out in January. So thank you, Joe. Now,
Thanks.
when it comes to kind of personal development, developing your leadership skills, we talked about a lot of things that you should do. Control your emotions, become the best version of yourself. And all of those things are great end of the road. They're great objectives. They're great goals. My question for you is, what are some spark notes on how to get there? What have you found that's been helpful to actually get to that destination?
Yeah, the very first thing, starts with it's our thoughts right up front. Okay, because if I mean, every single day we need to condition ourselves for success.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, you wouldn't just go to the gym and work out one time and say I'm done.
Right.
You're going to go and you're going to do reps, you're going to do sets, you're going to come back the next day and the next day and the next day. So the very first thing any leader needs to do is to be aware of the way they're thinking, the way they're seeing things, the things that they're saying to themselves, the way that they talk to themselves. I mean, if I say to myself, gosh, there you go again. That was so stupid. You're always making these mistakes. You're an idiot or whatever. The things people say to themselves are horrible.
Right.
So that first thing, the spark notes are, hey, pay attention to the way you're focused on your day and the things that you think. Do you have routines that build you up? What's the first thing you do in the morning? Is it to pick up your cell phone and start doing email? Is it to check social media? Is it to see a post that you don't like and you get all down? It's like, what are your routines? So that's where I would start, Jay, is, we got to start in ourselves. We can't give what we don't have. And if we want to lead people, we have to be able to lead ourselves first.
And that's what I was kind of hoping to get at. It's really like goals are great. Like, what is the objective? Where do you want to be a year from now? But it's about the habits that you have today that's going to get you there. It's the exercise, the meditating, the self talk, taking good care of yourself, staying clean and minimalist. Look at other great leaders, imitate what their habits are, and chances are you'll get pretty close eventually to those goals that you want to hit. So very good stuff there.
Yeah, no question. You're absolutely right. And some of this takes time. I know, again, when I was early in my career, it was hard because I wanted some of these things to happen faster. But to some degree, it's a little bit like, maybe this isn't the best analogy, but you plant a seed, you water it, it gets sun. It's going to take time. It's going to grow, but I mean, you can't yell at the seed and have it grow faster. I mean, it's gonna grow. So if you keep doing the right things, you're gonna become a stronger leader. You're going to become really good. But you got to be open to it. There's patience, and there's also being open to feedback. And how is what I'm doing? Is it working? What do I need to change? I'm not gonna be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, and being okay with that and learning along the way.
Awesome. I'd love to ask you a few fun questions about leadership and entrepreneurship, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right, I'll start easy. What is the biggest mistake that you see leaders and CEOs make in their companies?
Thinking the biggest mistake I see CEOs and leaders make. I mean, there's a lot of
If you want to give a couple, feel free.
well, I mean, I'll say one thing. I think sometimes people can be too myopically focused on goals without thinking about people.
Yeah.
And especially today, especially when people are remote, leaders have to think about culture. They have to think about how they connect with people. They've got to, there's a great quote. It's been around for a while. It's from Theodore Roosevelt, which is, people don't care what you know until they know that you care, right? At the end of the day, we've got technology, we've got all kinds of things, but we're still people, and everything is relationship based. So I think sometimes, leaders can take for granted their people. They can take for granted their culture. And especially in tight labor markets where people have choice, that's very costly to do that. But that's definitely something that jumps out to me, that the leader isn't committed to a culture, isn't thinking about how they're focused on their people, just focused on the results. You got to be focused on the results, and you have to be focused on the people too.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you talked a lot about culture as it pertains to leadership. The past few years, a lot of companies, a lot of people have gone out of the office. Full companies have gone remote. What is your opinion on remote work and leadership and culture?
What we know is that we're still in a state of flux. I mean, I talked to a CEO just about this the other day, and he was saying his goal is to get people in, 4 days a week, 5 days a week. In his business, he felt like it was important to make that happen.
Mhm.
Other CEOs I talked to are comfortable with a remote or a hybrid. So the bottom line is that we're going to continue to be in a state of flux for a while, and maybe indefinitely. So the issue is really more about how you make that kind of operation work. I have a friend who's a CEO who's really concerned. People aren't being productive if you can't see them. They're not in the office. Their cameras are off, and are people even paying attention to meetings? There are ways to lead virtual teams. We teach that in Dale Carnegie, how to lead effective virtual teams, how to create strong cultures, in a virtual environment.
Give me a couple. Give me a
So
couple of your best ways, your best strategies.
to do that,
Yeah, to be a good leader and get the most out of people in a virtual environment.
well, I mean, this, I guess we're getting into kind of, there's some tactics, which is, we encourage people to be on camera, certainly. We encourage leaders to check in with their team members. The kind of thing you can do in an office, whether it's walking into someone's office, running into them in the kitchen, having conversations, walking to the car, those don't happen in a virtual environment. So the leader has to intentionally make sure that they are uh, doing that. And sometimes, because we're working from home, or many of us are still, then you get so focused on what you've got in the day, you can easily forget about the people. So the first thing you have to do with a virtual culture is to be intentional about it, and to say, what do I want for this business? If I want trust, if I want transparency, if I want connection, then there are things I have to do and steps I have to take personally to do that. As a CEO, I've got to make sure that my executive team is doing that, and that their managers are doing that. So it's got to be throughout the whole organization. But I think it starts with articulating values, whether you're in person the whole time, whether you're remote the whole time, whether you're a hybrid. But culture is something that it's going to exist whether you are intentional about it or not. So why not be intentional, and why not create just a powerful culture?
Yeah, I agree. And that's something we've kind of struggled with our hybrid team. But we bought a building so people would want to come in. So hopefully that works. Cool. Let's get back to some fun questions. Who is your favorite CEO of all time, living or dead, and why?
I've already kind of tipped that card a little bit, because I'd say it's Alan Mullally. Alan, I can't say enough good things about him, and he's living and well and healthy, thank goodness. And but I say that because when I came to Dale Carnegie in 2015, I'm thinking about taking over this company that's over 100 years old, and I want to make sure that I'm successful, and I want to take what we're doing into an entirely new level, rebrand the business, reach people that we haven't reached, reach a younger audience, and so forth, and get our whole organization working as one team. Prior to starting, a friend of mine told me about American Icon, this book about Alan Mullally and how he completely transformed Ford. And I read this book. I'm like, oh my gosh, he had developed a system. It's called the Working Together Management System. And it includes a cadence of weekly meetings with the executive team that go through every metric of the business. But it's really more about visibility and transparency. Everybody knows the plan. Everybody knows the status against the plan. There are no secrets. So you think about what undermines cultures. A lot of times it's this gossip and the stuff that goes on in the corners and so forth. But if you can shine a light on things, then you can have a better culture. So when I heard about that, I said, we're going to implement that system at Dale Carnegie. And we did in 2016, less than a year after I was there. We started using that system. And when Alan heard about this through kind of our mutual friend, he contacted me, and we got talking, and he's personally coached me on the system. So when you take a man who was leading Ford Motor Company through the most perilous period of its time, it was like a plane going into a mountain. It was losing billions of dollars, and he was able to flip that whole thing in a matter of a couple of years so that it was making billions of dollars. And he did that while increasing his employee engagement scores. I mean, it's incredible what he did. So he's a true, authentic, wonderful person, very people focused, and I aspire to be the kind of leader that he was when he was leading companies.
I'm going to look into his story. Hopefully, he's produced some content and some teachings. Uh,
There are many good things out there about him. American Icon by Bryce Hoffman is a great place to start.
cool. Thank you. And obviously, you have a very accomplished career. You run an international leadership coaching business, very one that's a household name in many households. And I'm sure you've had quite a few experiences in your leadership career. Tell me about one that you effed up. You made a mistake as a leader, as someone who should have known better. What happened? Tell us a story.
Well, which story should I tell here?
Pick a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very judicious, and maybe I should tell a past story. Um, I mean, like a long ago story, but because there are two stories that stand in my mind about just the biggest challenges I've had in work. One of them was in the early 2000s, and the other one was more, I'd say, in the last 7 years. What I'd say is, you know, in the first case, I was leading a small company, and we were a startup, and we were growing, and kind of working through things. We had a client, and we had overpromised on a major deliverable, and it was just really really bad.
Mhm.
It wasn't that we were intentionally in doing that. I think we had a partner. We had outsourced a lot of our technology development outside of the U.S. And we thought at the time that our partner was going to come through, and they didn't. And we didn't build enough margin of time into the deliverable. And it was just a total uh, it was a total mess. It was a dumpster fire. It was the kind of thing where I was losing sleep. It was horrible. So we owned it, and we went to the client and we explained what was going on, and we walked them through it as much as we could, and they were mad. But we did get through it, and we did ultimately fix it. But what I learned from that experience was really be careful about number one, what you promise, and number two, what you believe and what you rely upon. You got to build margin in on some of these things, because when you say something, you better be darn sure you're going to be able to deliver on it, because it is so hard to gain trust and so easy to lose it. And that was a great client. And we ultimately did turn that around, but it took a long time.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It is very hard to gain trust, and you lose it pretty much. That's an old Warren Buffett one, right? With the credibility.
For sure.
Definitely don't rely on overseas vendors and overpromise what they're going to deliver, because that can land you in some trouble. We've definitely had our fair share of those as well. Very cool.
You
So
know, but Jay, I'd say too, one thing I've also learned is the need to take 100% responsibility,
yes,
which is, ultimately the client didn't care that it was that vendor. It was me. We made the promise and we
right.
failed to deliver. And so that 100% responsibility is a mindset that we've tried to take as I've moved on in, other organizations.
And that's, I think, a leadership tactic that's taught pretty widely too. Is assume responsibility. A leader starts pointing blame, that doesn't look good. So normally, kind of at this point in the episode or the interview, I would ask you to point to resources for people to go to for leadership. But you obviously run the greatest conglomerate of leadership training that exists. So talk to me a little bit about who might be a good fit for Dale Carnegie, and how to access some of that training and those programs. I know we spoke briefly pre-episode. You guys even have a location here in Tampa, so this is definitely something I'll be enrolling myself and my co-founder into. But walk me through Dale Carnegie. Who is this for?
Sure. Before I do, just a quick timeout. I am running really out of time. I've got another appointment that I have to leave for in about 5 minutes.
Cool.
I thought it was only about 30 minutes.
I should
Um,
have asked you for the hard stop earlier. So we'll cut
yeah,
cut it out before that question. I just did a little timestamp mark. Or do you want to answer that last one? Or do you want to run?
yeah. Let me. I can answer that very quickly, and I can thank you for having me on the show and that type of thing. But um, so so thank you, Jay, for the question about Dale Carnegie. So www.dalecarnegie.com is a great place to start. We've got a ton of free resources there, global research, insightful thought leadership, access to the podcast that I do, which interviews CEOs and other entrepreneurs and leaders. But it's also the access to our worldwide franchise network. So there are teams of people set up, and these people are outstanding at delivering Dale Carnegie programs in person, uh, online, could be a hybrid. If it's a company, they can go on site and deliver it for a company, or we have a public program. So if you want to take a Dale Carnegie class in Tampa, you can do that. But if you go to dalecarnegie.com, you'll find that's a great way to access all that we have.
Cool. Joe, thank you so much for coming on to the show. It was a pleasure talking leadership with you.
You too, Jay. Thank you so much.
All right. If you're listening, go buy the book. I will link it down in the show notes. See you, Joe.